that'll be good. Because I need to go back and study how I'm doing on these. Here we go. The most compelling chapters, good evening to you, the most compelling chapters on the history of yoga on a global scale is in the paper I have in front of me. I wrote this paper over the last month or so, and I found it when I was surfing around my files in my Windows 11 this morning. My Windows app this morning, shouldn't have said the exact name, I'm not advertising the exact name, and I found it in there under one of my files, and I said, oh, I almost forgot I wrote this. This could be a nice interruption in the series I've done so far, and I've done 4 videos so far on YouTube, and they've been a bit stuffy, but so I'm not too stuffy. The first one was definitely stuffy, but I'm gonna go on a lighter note here, and just I think it's best y'all have a background to know what you're dealing with once we come forward to my level of speaking on the subject that I know the most about, which is the philosophy of yoga. This is the history of yoga on a global scale, East versus West, and so forth and so on. So the first area here I've marked as the mystic origins, and well, what was mystical about them? Well, this is at the dawn. This is the dawn of civilization, 8,000 years ago. Up in northern India, along the Indus Valley, the Indus River and Indus Valley, and the river's fed, I believe, out of the Himalayas. The snow melts, and they feed the river. Then the rivers go on down and turn into the Ganges, and then later in the history of that part of the world, they considered a sacred river, and so forth and so on. So I'm literally going back to the source. Well, there was a gentleman. He may be real, he may not be real, but he's definitely part of the story of yoga from its dawn, entering into the world as a new science. It's a science. It's one of the first sciences, so to speak. It's not a religion. It's not just standing around, standing on your head in the corner on a studio mat. It's the actual. Not that that's not actual. That's just a part of it. But the core of yoga is the philosophy of yoga, and the philosophy of yoga are in the sacred early writings. The Vedas are part of that early, but they're about 3 steps down from the major writings. So here, let's get back into this now. So the transmission of yoga knowledge. Now, Adi Vega was that young man out there. Just, you don't have to close your eyes to think of this, but just, use your imagination a teeny bit and see him, this man, outside the small village. The writings haven't begun yet. The discussions that became the foundation of the philosophy of yoga hasn't begun yet. This is the gentleman that steps on the stage. I like to think of the historical figures as stepping on the stage of history. So this is the gentleman that steps on the stage that started it all. It began with a man named Adi Yoga, A-D-I, and then Yogi, A-D-I Yogi. He is the first yogi. I'm one of the, I won't be here much longer, but I'm a yogi while I'm here. So from that gentleman to me, there's been a continuated coming and goings of yogis. And what most yogis do is they formulate ideas. My specialty is comparative. I compare all the religions of the world. I compare all the sects. I compare all the mythologies of those religions and those sects. And sects, I'm seeing S-E-C-T-S. And so forth and so on. And that's my cup of tea. Not everybody wants to go as deep into as I have, but I've swam the width and the depths. The widths and the depths. I'm still working on the length of how far I'm going to, but I have swam the width and the depth so far, not too far, into the deep, but I have dove well below the surface. So that's who Adi Yogi is. He's the first yogi. He just appears. The story goes, and it is a story, that no one saw him come. Here's a little village, I'm sure they had people looking around to make sure the tribe down the street or the boys that fought with him a couple of years ago and took off a few of their stock animals. I'm sure they've got a lookout. Most small groups in that day did, but this guy slipped under the radar, so to speak. No radar, but he slipped under. He got past, and all of a sudden he's just sitting out there outside the village. I thought, somebody sees him. And again, no TV, no radio, word of mouth is how everything was passed. And somebody sees him, and they go, "Gosh, what's going on here?" And they start walking out, and then somebody runs back and grabs it. It's sort of like nowadays when a major football game comes down. Here's a new event right here on our doorsteps, so we've got something to do. We've got a stranger in town. We can drop the plowing and the harvesting and the cooking and the sewing of furs or whatever we're wearing, whatever's in season this year, this century. And we can just take a holiday and go out there and visit with this fellow. Well, they go out there to him, and I said he stepped on the stage, but at this point he's actually sitting on the stage, not in the classic yogi pose. He's just sitting there. I don't know how he was sitting. They never described that. But I would say, just like we did when we were kids watching TV, or my generation did, we'd sit on the floor, our legs kind of crossed, not in the classic yogi style where one ankle's up on one thigh and the other ankle's up on the other thigh, but just sitting there kind of, when I was a kid, we called that it's just a kid on the floor pose. So he's sitting there. Let's say he is sitting there like that. So there he's sitting there like that, and these folks walk up, and, they didn't want to be rude to a stranger, because even in those early days, they had manners, believe it or not. And they were organized to a degree that they were civilized, because a civilization, there it is, a civilization that invents yoga, and then within 200 or 300 years comes out with incredible written manuscripts where they've already analyzed it and compared and rationed, using their rational ability, have worked through the different layers of the human mind, the soul. All of this was done within about 300 or 400 or 500 years. Of course, in our time, it takes a little longer because we're busy doing other things, but they didn't have a lot to do back then, like I said. But this was their inspiration, this gentleman, Adi Yogi. You go, well, how did he inspire them if he's just sitting there not saying anything? Well, just like a typical crowd that comes to see a scene that's going on that's making the news for a few minutes, that 15 minutes of fame that Andy Warhol talked about, They come up, and he's not saying anything, and the ladies go, well, that's a handsome dog, and the men go, he doesn't look like he could work very hard in our field, so, goodbye to you. Well, maybe some of the ladies might have been attracted, because the iconic image you always see of him, actually in the iconic image, he's always older and has pure white hair, and he's still muscular and everything, so, who knows? Maybe the ladies liked him, maybe they liked the boys that had back at the hut, I don't know, it doesn't matter. So he's sitting there, and everybody goes away, except a few guys hang around, and now that the crowd's gone, they feel emboldened to say, hey, you're outside our village here, you mind we asking who you are? And he probably said in a soft voice, I'm just imagining this for you to give you a narrative here. He probably said in a rather subdued, soft voice. He may have said that his name was Adi. The yogi name came later. Adi, simple name, A-D-I, Adi, I am Adi. And then these young men of curiosity, well, they're just perfectly set in the right setting, in the right time to become his students. Now, aren't they? He's not only the first guru, he's the first Swami, he's the teacher. Yogis oftentimes turn out to be teachers. Well, I'm a yogi, and I've chosen the history of the philosophy of yoga is my subject to expound on. So he likes them, they like him, and it turns out there happen to be just 7 of them. 7. And as history progresses, the historians of yoga gave them a name, and I may be really messing this up. I don't have my notes in front of me to say exactly what it was, but I believe the word 7 in Sanskrit, there's a lot of words in Sanskrit, and it's not my native tongue, so forgive me, but I believe it's something like septum, septam, something like that, septam, and then yogi is yogi, or no, he's the yogi. They become the rishis, the rish. Rish are wise men. Rish are people that write. Rish are the recorders. Rish, and then rishis are plural, and there's 7 of them. So they became the septam rishis. They became the ones that he sent out to the world, sound familiar? To deliver the word to the world of what he taught them. But the remarkable thing is, he not only taught them the postures, the asanas. He taught them the wisdom. He was the light bringer. The Lord of Light in the Hindus is the Agni, A-G-N-I, fire. He's the god of fire. So this is just mythology. Now I'm going to let you know up front, I am not a follower of anything in the philosophy of yoga that doesn't make sense to me. I memorize the name of these gods and their avatars and all of that, but I'm not a follower. I'm just a student of the subject. But if I believe deeply, if it's logical to me, then I will follow their teachings, because if you got a good teacher and he's making sense and he scores somewhere in the back of your brain or in the middle of your brain, you go, I can relate to that, then I will learn. And I do, and have, and shall. I'm not done learning yet. That's not brag, that's just fact. So here he is sitting there. They come up, and lo and behold, within 6 months, I don't know how long it took. No one knows how long it took. I don't care who says they know. How could they? They weren't there. There were no phones with recording devices on them. This all came down through history, and as you well know, history changes generation to generation. It also changes anytime a conqueror comes into a country. The history of that country will change, because the victors write the books. They change the history of a country when they walk in. They make their country, who was a former enemy, look very good in the future generations' eyes. They start throwing out that propaganda. So they are, the young men, he teaches them till they're full. Glass half empty, glass half full. You can't pour anything into a full glass. All those little stories had their foundation in a lot of these writings that were around that you could find in the yogic texts, the great sacred books of yoga. Just the texts in general. I'm not going to get into the books now. I'm just going to stay on path here. So he's sitting there. He's very still. He looks like he knows something. So that's what attracted them. That's what made them stay. He has this profound wisdom radiating out of him. He just radiates this knowledge and self control and self. He's feeling good about himself. He's a man that knows his place in the world and history, probably at that point in time. But he's silent. They have to pull things out of him. And when he does answer, from what I've gathered, he just kind of whispers the answer. And if you're not listening, he doesn't repeat. So if you're not listening, so be it. Just like some college courses. Once that prof says it, you're not paying attention, tough cookies. And it's not over the factory with the little guys in the trees either. So they become his sages, the 7 sages. Because they stayed with this silent teacher, and they were patient, and he was patient with them. And because nobody else was around, he opened up to them. He had to open up. He couldn't have been silent. You can't transmit thought. Well, maybe in those days he could. I don't know. I don't know who he was, but I know he was special. And I know he had 7 men that followed him. He taught them not only the positions of yoga, the physical, but he also taught them the mental, and he also taught them the mystical. He brought with him from wherever he came knowledge beyond the scope of any man that lived on earth. And that knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation. But you got to dig for it. I mean, I bump into one of those little gold nuggets every once in a while myself, but I've had to dig for it. Well, I'm about halfway through this talk. It looks like it's good. I made some progress here. But I'm only on the first paragraph, so I better move on down the road here. So now that we've gone past the mystic origins, let's travel back to those ancient settlements I was talking about. Okay. And there are in the Indus valleys. And archaeologists have gone there and have found little small seals, and some of the little seals are like early Indus Valley inhabitants that are sitting in yogic positions. Marvelous, huh? I mean, there's the proof in the pudding right there. Meditative figures, things of that nature. And they're marked sometimes with ancient writing, ancient Sanskrit, one of the first written languages of the world, the Sanskrit alphabet, and one of the first languages that wrote its thoughts down, Sanskrit. I believe it right. So as this Vedic age dawned, the sun came up, Adi Yogi came along, the rishis followed him, the knowledge is expanded. He sent them out into the world to teach his knowledge. I may be getting ahead of myself here, but he shared all that arcane, all that mystical knowledge with them. And then they became his torchbearers. He said, take my light. Light in a lot of different philosophies. Symbolizes knowledge. Of course, darkness symbolizes ignorance. But we'll go there later. One of my tapes coming up, one of my videos coming up is a follow-up on those 4 I've done, and it will be strictly on the subject of ignorance. Because you've got to overcome ignorance if you're going to get anywhere in learning the philosophy of yoga. You can't just stay ignorant and work through I won't call them courses, but my talks that keep going up and up and up. I start with basics and I build, like the pyramids, I build a foundational base, and then and then the work gets a little narrower and narrower and narrower as it gets higher and higher and higher in depth and in concentration on the facts that we're going to go through to get to the top of the ladder, so to speak. I just mix metaphors there, ladders and pyramids, but you get my drift. Okay, so he's silent. He's really in his silence. He gives them a hint. They're saying to themselves, I wonder what he's thinking about. See, they're thinking about their crops and their kids and the enemy coming over the hill or coming up the river or whatever. And I thought, well, never mind. I have a little floaters in my eyes from my cataract surgery. I've got a little leftovers. Sometimes I have to see things that aren't out there. Sorry about that. So that's what they're thinking about day to day, Mom washing dishes, Dad going out and hunting something down, and, they're having it for supper or whatever. But he's not thinking about that. And they're going, what is this fellow? I'm just trying to modernize it for us here so you get a contemporaneous idea of what they were working out in their minds. And so they're sitting there or standing there or sitting next to him and they're saying, I wonder what this fellow is thinking about. Well, he kind of gave him a hint. Sometimes he would get a far-off stare, his eyes would open, and he would look at them, but past them at the same time. And they're saying to themselves, what is he looking at? He doesn't even see us, but he's still looking. Wow, that's an old yogi trick. He was looking at, I'm not trying to be sinister with that laugh. Sorry about that. He was looking inward. And inward is direction that I will teach you. You can look at the world all day, but you're not going to see much different than you did, yet much more that is different from what you've been seeing for however many years you've been on this earth. It's inward. You go, well, what does he mean by inward? Well, what I mean by inward is when you look inward, that is where the true knowledge is. Psychologists, psychiatrists will tell you about your subconscious. Yeah, well, there is a subconscious, and that's where a lot of things are tucked away and hidden. I think most psychologists, psychiatrists agree that you're traumatized by something as a child, or you're embarrassed by something in public, and you don't want to deal with it, so you tuck it away. It's like a little storehouse of forbidden fruit or dismayed happenings that you want to remember them, but you don't want to floating up every day. So you kind of tuck them away in this cellar of known but unwanted ideas until you need them. But that's not the cellar he was looking in. He wasn't looking downward in himself, into his psyche. You know, he was looking upward in himself to what he knew to be there and what he was looking at. First he was concentrating, and then to concentrate, that's why that look, that stare, as though he was looking at a candle in a windless room where the flame was just there, and he's looking at that flame, but it's not doing this, so his eyes don't move. He's just looking at it. That's a focal point. That's very much part of meditation. You have to have a focal point, one point, not a bunch. So he's looking at that flame, which is not what he was looking at, but I'm giving you the example. So the concentration comes, and then the meditation comes. He's sitting there meditating. Well, these people have never seen anybody meditating. Well, maybe old Abdul, or whatever his name, I'm not making fun of anybody's name from any part of the world. Let's just call him Mr. Farmer, because that's the name in almost every language in the tongue, in the translation of the word farmer into their language. Mr. Farmer's back home, and he's got a grandfather, and the grandfather sits around and he drinks some rice wine or some soma juice or whatever, and he's just sitting around. Well, he gets that look. And he stares off, but he's an old man, you know. Well, hell, I'm an old man, but I mean, this is a tired old man. He's physically worked all his life. Well, I've done some physical labor, but not to the degree I'm talking about to survive like they were doing back then. So the old man sits around, and he has that same look, but he's just an old man. And what he's doing is he's remembering, hopefully, he's remembering the finer times. And, you know, when he and everybody's grandmother was, you know, they were had a little hoedown out at the edge of the whatever field kind of crops they were growing in the Indus Valley in those days, or digging a well or whatever. He's remembering the good times. Well, Adi Yogi is not remembering the good times. He's looking more into a spiritual world. And that's the highest end of yoga. It's the spiritual world. Your spirit is in there. And he's making contact with that spirit. I'm theorizing on this, but if I were there and I was Adi, that's what I'd be doing. I promise you. And I'm not trying to equate myself with the first yogi and the greatest one in the history, the premier. I'm not trying to do that. But I'm just trying to make sense of it for you, using the best words I can conjure at this moment. So there they are. And so he breaks the silence. He would have to. And, you know, he's been meditating maybe for he could have been meditating the entire time he was there and never saw that village come and go. That's called a yogic power. It's called a siddhi. Siddhi. I'm not going to spell these. Look them up. Shiddhi, I believe that's how it's spelled. Siddhi. Look it up, though. You'll learn. This is part of the philosophy of yoga. This isn't down at the local studio, the yoga studio, and everybody telling you about what new mat they got this week and how good it smells and how easy it is to keep clean and rolls up so easily. This isn't that. This is the power. This is the information. This is You have to go back into some old library, dust off some old book, and then dig around in there. And sometimes in the original tongue, Sanskrit, to find these things I'm talking to you about. This isn't something you run down to 7-Eleven through a name, the corner of a convenience store, and say the guy on the other side of the counter you might have went to high school with, say, hey Fred, you got a piece of ancient, important Vedic knowledge with me? You can give me for $1 because that's all I got with me. Hey, oh yeah, I got it right here. Which brand do you want? Like a pack of cigarettes or something. This isn't how it's done. It takes years and years of dedicated study. So if you don't have to come up to my level, even a year or two of study and having a good guru. I'm not a guru. Even a year or two of study under a good guru will elevate you to give you certain abilities that will not put you above the crowd, because we're not above the crowd, but give you ways of dealing with the world, the ways of dealing with the world that are beyond the general comprehension of the crowd. That's a good way to say it. So we travel along here, 10 minutes, folks, gotta wrap her up. Okay, so we've traveled back to that settlement. I told you what was going on out there. I told you how he showed up out of nowhere and all of that. So he really, even in his silence, gave voice to humanity for the first time by introducing yoga to the world in his silent, modest, quiet way. He brought that gift from wherever he came onto that plain outside that village, and he imparted the gift of yoga to him. And he must have done it really in a concise way. I couldn't have done it. But then again, he's the first, so he didn't have to impress anybody. I'm not trying to impress anybody, but he did not have to. He just said, here it is, boys. I'm just imagining this. Tell you once, get it, don't get it. And of 7 people, they would discuss it after they leave him, I'm sure. So what one didn't catch, maybe one of the other 6 did. And then they'd sit around in groups and discuss what he had spoken of that day. And one would say, oh no, he didn't say it that way. What he meant was this. And there begins. Makes perfect sense to me. And there is the birth of yoga philosophy, the study of wisdom. They're studying what this man said to them. Yoga is what he was talking about, and wisdom is what they were hearing, and the study of wisdom is philosophy. And what's the subject of the philosophy? Yoga philosophy, the study of yoga philosophy. That is my, if I have, then I can never say that I have it to a degree anyone else has it, but I do have it to a higher degree than most people that walk into a studio or go over to UT library, into one of the libraries over there that have some very arcane books, but they haven't been studying them for 50 years like I have, or 51, whatever my number is nowadays. It's going to be going up to 52 soon, I'm sure. But that Vedic age dawned. And the first thing they started with, besides writing it down, they're not writing them down yet, they started with the hymns, praising the Creator. I don't even know if he's named yet. But remember, they have a pantheon of gods in the Hindu religion. So I'm not quite sure which gods were named earlier. I think Ishvara was one, who's sort of an avatar of Brahman. And maybe the other 2 of the Trimurti, the 3 major gods, were in there. Maybe the 3 gods were in there. Who knows? But I'm not going to get into the gods today, because if I do that, that's another hour or 2. So we'll stay away from that. So he gave voice to humanity's longing for unity. Maybe there was some tribal problem, maybe even an inter-tribal rivalry going on, and he observed it, sitting around a few days teaching, and he said, hey boys, you know how you can deal with that? You do it this way. So he brought a voice to humanity, who at that time might have been longing for unity. And that would work perfectly because the word yoga comes from the base word yuj, Y-U-J, and it simply means to yoke, like you yoke two oxen together, or to unite, you know. And that became the golden thread that is woven into and through and continue on through every ritual, every breath that a yogi takes has this historical thread running up, even through the fiber of his body today. That history travels along that golden thread. That's what connects me with Adi Yogi, that common thread coming through history. Every breath I take, I'm sure not as well, but in the same manner that he taught them to breathe, which means he breathed that way. And he also erected a bridge to them because he reached out to them. Remember, he's sitting there. They're sitting around waiting for him to break the silence. They didn't want to be rude. So he built a bridge between them. Even in the silence, he was constructing the bridge. He was letting them watch him and how he moved and how he sat, and his posture was straight. But the bridge he was building then, and the bridge has spanned that time to this time, to my time and your time. And it has reached me, by the way. And it will reach you eventually if you stay with this. You've got to be steadfast. You've got to want to learn these things. I don't know how long I've got on this earth, but I have already promised myself in the last, well, right before I started my videos, I said, well, old boy, you may, I'm sorry I laughed, but I don't take life seriously. I know where my reward is, and I know where I'm going. I've worked it all out. I'm not worried about it at all. So I said to myself, well, old boy, you don't have long left. And nowadays, people are there for a few years. Everybody was saying, I'm going to leave this as my legacy. Well, I don't have a legacy. Give me a break, a legacy. But I do. And it's the knowledge between that part of my cranium and that part of my cranium, and tucked around in there, and all those little cells and corpuscles and all that little that organ that my body is designed to carry around. Now, remember that. Later, I'm going to tell you another usage for the body. But basically, the body is designed just to carry your brain around. I don't know if you know that or not, and spinal cord. I don't know if you know that or not, but that's my theory on it. So anyway, that bridge he was building was not just from there to 100 years later, and then 500 years later, and then past the Christian era, and then past the Renaissance, and up through the Age of Enlightenment, and then into the 20th century, and then into the electronic age, and then in today, the day of the AI. And it did span all that, and it's still spanning. But that bridge is not only built to go from A to B. I'm B in this bridge, or you are, or whoever, and there's a lot of subdivisions there. That bridge was built to go past the finite into the infinite, into infinity. And I think that's a good enough note for today. What do you think? I hope I didn't overdo it or underdo it, but I thought we had fun, or I had fun. I always have fun. Well, when you know yogi, you know enough to have fun and not take the world seriously. So I want to leave you, I'm trying to create a closing. I want to leave you with this thought. Be good to each other and spread that message. Perhaps if everyone is good to every other person on this earth, within 10 years, we all may wake up in a totally different world. Okay. My birth name, okay, well, I'll stop there.